Well, great day, and welcome to Hacking HR's HR Innovation and Future of Work Global Online Conference and Workshop Day 3. You have entered the breakout session, Reinventing Jobs and Work. I'm Marcus Holmes, your moderator for this panel, and I am in the beautiful downtown Detroit district in the Coleman A. Young Municipal Center in one of our training spaces, where it's about 45 degrees. And I'm a member of the awesome human resources team here at the City of Detroit, which is a great place to work and striving to become an employer of choice. So if you'll just drop in the comments in the chat as a way of an icebreaker, where are you and what's the temperature and weather like where you are? I'd like to start out today by thanking you for joining us and to welcome you to the breakout session. You know, Detroit is known for a lot of things. Two of the great things that we're known for is Motown, our music, right? From the Queen of Soul to the Supremes, from Smokey Robinson to the Tempting Temptations, we're known around the world for our music. We're also known for our automobiles, sleek ones, fast ones, reliable ones, and it all started right here in Detroit. It's been stated that the automotive industry almost single-handedly built a working middle class, enabling workers to gain unique skills that would provide for them and their families a great livelihood. Well, imagine that there is a small, thriving, two-tier minority auto supplier in the heart of Detroit. Tier 2 just means that they supply something that doesn't go directly into the end product of the vehicle. This company makes racks. These racks hold parts that go from assembly line to assembly line, from city to city, from state to state, moving the parts throughout the system. Imagine that one day the IT group and the engineering group collaborate on some ingenious ideas to leverage the Internet of Things and to leverage automation so that a portion of the fabrication, the assembly, the painting would be reduced. Those labor hours would be reduced to produce a finished rack by almost 39%. Suddenly, that organization that might have hundreds of employees is faced with addressing the concerns of a workforce whose specialized skills would need to change substantially to continue the work. Well, we really don't have to imagine that, do we? Because that is what's happening throughout the world. Many companies are facing this reality that automation and technology in the workplace will require reinvention of jobs and work. And in at least one statistic, in just about 2 years, 50% of organizations believe that automation will lead to a reduction in the full-time workforce. The human share of labor hours would decline 71% from 71% to 58%. The fourth industrial revolution is here. And who better to talk about the fourth industrial revolution than one of our panel members who is here right now. And I want to just introduce him, Ravin Jesuthasan. I hope I almost got that correct, sir. Okay,
Close,
thank you so
Marcus.
much. Ravin is a recognized global thought leader, futurist, and author on the future of work and human capital. I could tell you so many impressive things about the things I've read about him. He has over 100 articles, 10 of which have been published in the prestigious Harvard Review, serves on the World Economic Forum, has led many research efforts, groundbreaking research in the shaping of future implications of digital media for society, creating a shared vision for talent in the fourth industrial revolution, and HR 4.0, shaping people strategies in the fourth industrial revolution. I'm having challenges here. He's spoken around the world, North America, Latin America, Europe, Asia Pacific, the Middle East, on all types of news media outlets, and very impressive to me and maybe to you, one of the 25 most influential consultants in the world, according to Consultant Magazine, one of the top 8 future of work influencers by Tech News, one of the top 100 HR influencers by HR Executive. Welcome, Ravin.
Thank you, Marcus. And I must apologize for you having to read out all of that and for the audience having to endure it. So you're very kind to do so.
What an impressive background. I am honored to be here with you. And I didn't even go on to talk about your list of clients. One of the things that I did want to mention, though, some of your clients from previous presentations, you've helped them to save 60 to 80% with restructuring of jobs. So I want to just have you dive right in. I always ask presenters, forgive me, it's the recruiter in me, but tell us something that's off the script a little bit about Ravin that we might not find in this bio.
Oh boy. I think it's probably my inspiration. My inspiration comes from my kids, who are 23 and 20, and my wife, who is also a consultant. And I am always in awe of how every day the three of them just keep trying to make themselves better. And that's what kind of makes me want to get better every day.
And just going back to the chat, Ravin, we've got Kevin in Orlando with 88 degrees, Natalie in Chicago, 54 degrees. Nancy's here in Detroit with me. It's a balmy Detroit as well, 67 in Dallas, North Carolina, South Florida. Wonderful. Right now, Ravin looks very tired. We're working him hard. That's what that is, Louise. We're working him hard. And so, Ravin, I want to jump right in because my first question, and I'm sure you will cover this among the many things we'll cover, what is this fourth industrial revolution and why is it disrupting the hierarchy that we have traditionally had in organizations?
Yeah, Marcus, that's a great place to start. So I'm going to apologize, but I'm going to start with a bit of a history lesson, just so we have the context for how work has evolved. This was something that we did about 5 years ago for the World Economic Forum when their book, The Fourth Industrial Revolution, was published. And we asked ourselves the question of, what we're seeing here a fundamental pivot in how work is done? And I love the fact, Marcus, that you started with Detroit, because much of how we work today originated from when Henry Ford adapted the assembly line. So that's the genesis for arguably how 80% of people in the world engage with organizations today. And so in that era, so take yourself back about 120, 130 years, work was done primarily in jobs. Those jobs aggregated into job families. Those jobs became the basis for income today and income post-employment. The notion of the company as a social institution was born, right? Because for the first time, we started to spend most of our waking hours with these people we called co-workers and employees. Work was done within the walls of the enterprise, which was fine in an era which was predicated on great stability. Every year, Ford and General Motors and GE could nail down to the second or third decimal point what their growth would be, the next year. And they could plan for how many people they needed, how many managers they needed, how they needed to upskill or reskill their people, etc. You fast forward to what's called the third industrial revolution. And what that is what Andrew McAfee calls the first machine age. And essentially, I beg your pardon, the second machine age, because that was the start of the information age. So for the first time, we started to see rapid proliferation and democratization of information technology, the birth of the World Wide Web. Our ability to look outside the company and understand what's the cost and capabilities of work being done by some third party, an alliance partner, by maybe an outsourcer, etc. And in that era, not only did we have greater clarity, we also had a lot less certainty, because we went from the stability of the early 20th century to the volatility of the 60s and 70s with the Vietnam War, the oil shocks of the early 70s. So much greater volatility, but more clarity. And as a result of this democratization of information, what we saw was companies getting gains of about 25 to 30% as a result of work being lifted and shifted to other parts of the world, to other providers who might be more efficient. This fourth industrial revolution is even more intriguing and complex, because what you're seeing is the convergence of multiple technologies. So think of cloud-based computing, the ability to sort of seamlessly store data and deploy applications, the rapidly falling cost of graphic processing units, which is what is powering AI, because you've now got the engines that are needed to sort of power these algorithms. The rising, the proliferation of low-cost sensors, be they optical sensors, voice sensors, flow sensors for fluids, and all of these sensors are generating the data that's needed to power AI. And then on top of that, you've got 5G, which is going to reduce latency and increase speed to levels that we've never ever achieved. And then you have AI, which has been around since the late 50s, but is now powered by this enabling architecture, right? Which is why it's reaching its potential. And so as a result of these technology forces, and another major force that often goes untalked about called the democratization of work. So our ability to not just have work be bound up in a company, our ability to unbundle that work, pull it apart, distribute it anywhere in the world to the most capable person at the lowest cost who can do it the fastest. Those two forces are underpinning this fourth industrial revolution. And what we're seeing are not gains of 25 to 30%, Marcus, when we went from the second to the third industrial revolution, but gains of 60 to 80% as we go from the second to the fourth industrial revolution. And this is a massive challenge to how all of us, I suspect everyone on this call, has grown up in terms of thinking about work and thinking about work being inextricably linked to this notion of a job. So my apologies for the long history lesson, but always helpful to know where we're coming from when we're thinking about where we're going.
Thank you for that. And one of your quotes that I want to mention, the fourth industrial revolution has arrived, heralding a transformative change in work with widespread consequences for companies and individuals. And so if you can delve in, I know we're trying to get Kathy on the camera and I'm going to introduce her in a moment. If you can delve in a little bit more about this fourth industrial revolution and these widespread consequences for companies and individuals.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have the context for how work is changing, and what that's resulting in. And let me share some data with you to give you a sense of how organizations are responding. Earlier this year, at the end of last year, we did a study of some 1,300 companies to say how are these two forces, the democratization of work and technology enablement, actually playing out as digitalization takes hold. And there were a number of things that we heard, and I'm toggling between two laptops, so if I'm not looking at the camera, I don't know why. So in terms of changes companies are making today to respond, much of it was focused on how do we improve collaboration and sharing. And it's funny because our little experience, we're not little anymore, but this experience with COVID-19 is accelerating some of the early markers of this future of work, because it is accelerating the rush to remote working, because we're all working from home, as you can probably guess that I am. And so collaboration and sharing of information was sort of front and center. Increasing work flexibility, so allowing you to work on your terms, when you want, how you want, through technology was kind of a key part of that, and enabling work to be deployed to other locations. So we think of that as kind of the first step forward. What's more interesting is when we look at what are companies going to do over the next 3 years. And over the next 3 years, the things that people told us were they were going to start to get to a very different mix of employees versus gig talent. They were going to start to improve. They were going to start to change how they designed jobs. In some cases, so the work could be done by people with less skills. And in other cases, they were going to redesign the work so it could be done by people with more skills. So making the best use of the human capacity, the ingenuity, the innovation, the creativity, the critical thinking skills of the people we have, while applying more and more automation. And yet in other cases, they were thinking about redesigning work to require less employees. And I want to pick up on that point in a second, but I'm going to pause to make sure that this
absolutely. And I see Mike Ravin has made a comment about adaptability as a superpower for reinventing ourselves in the context of work, and I'm sure we'll get to that in a little bit. So it is certainly resonating with me. And I wanted to ask you about this mix of, because it's not a destination, right, Ravin? It's a journey. So how would you advise HR on how they might partner with C-suite and CEOs to arrive at this mix of democratization of work, employer relationship types, human workforce, and automation?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and Mark, I want to make sure if Kathy's on, I want to make sure she's able to join in. So,
Kathy, I'm sorry, I was hoping to see her face. Kathy, can you hear us?
I can.
Welcome. I apologize. I was just hoping to see your face. I apologize. And I want to introduce the other member of our panel, Kathy Heinrich, who is currently the CEO of the Milwaukee Tech Hub Coalition, whose goal is to double the tech talent in Milwaukee.
And who apparently can't get her tech working today. So apologize for that.
But I wasn't going to even say that. I was going to say congratulations in this month of International Women's History. That's what I was going to say. It's great to have a balance in the panel of experts, both Ravin and yourself, but I know it's International Women's History Month. So to have women in leadership in tech, I think that's important, diversity, inclusiveness, and belonging. And so I was going to infuse that in. So no ba-dump bump for the tech. Anything can happen, right? And I love that you've got over 25 years in the tech industry, including executive leadership of sales and partnership organizations, including a startup between large corporate partners, which we're going to talk about a little bit. In 2017, you dedicated yourself to ensuring individuals and organizations have the skills to succeed in the era of AI and automation by pursuing your master's in workforce and talent development for LSU. Welcome, Kathy. I really appreciate you being here. And again, I apologize. I was looking for your face on the screen.
Understand, and thank you very much.
Absolutely.
So, Marcus, shall I just pick up then? So, you know, we're seeing some significant changes for HR as a function and as a profession. And much of it involves shifting from being a steward of employment, when 100% of work was being done by employees, to shifting to being a steward of work, where increasingly more and more work will be done by what we call this new plurality of means. And let me explain that. So in the second industrial revolution, 100% of work was done by employees and jobs. And so you had the binary choice of either hiring someone or developing them to do work. In the third, we added 3 additional options. I could outsource, I could lift and shift a process to some third party. I could collaborate with an alliance or an alliance partner, or I could start to use this new thing called free agents or independent contractors that first appeared in the sort of 50s and 60s and 70s. And so now I had 4 choices for getting work done. And then today I have 8, because in addition to those 4, I've also got online gig platforms or talent platforms like Upwork and Topcoder and Tongle, and there's about over 500 of these. I've got, if you're in consumer goods, you probably tap volunteers on social media on a pretty regular basis to get work done. And I think the big game changes are robotics and artificial intelligence. So much of how we're seeing HR evolve from being the steward of employment to being a steward of work is helping business leaders lead with the work, not with the technology, and navigate how each of these 8 options should plug into the operating model of the company. When does it make sense to pivot from using employees to deconstructing jobs and perhaps automating part of it? When does it make sense to tap into that gig worker on Upwork? But at the heart of this is, whether we call it the employee experience or the talent experience, the capacity and capability of HR to continuously shape a compelling experience for every human being who engages with the work of the organization continues to be essential.
Right. And Ravin, I want you to talk a little bit about some of the roles as HR pivots, some of the roles that are emerging for them to help to go to the future of work, and not just the focus on the jobs, but more the work and the experience that have to be done. You talk in HR 4.0 about some emerging roles that may be coming forward. Talk a little bit about that, and then we'll double back to you, Kathy, because I want to talk to you about what about these organizations that need to absorb some of this technology and automation that might not yet be there. So talk to us a little bit about technology absorption. Ravin?
Yeah, so Marcus, I'll just pick on two roles as an example, and for the audience, we Enrique will be sharing these studies, but HR 4.0 is a study that was done by the World Economic Forum with Unilever, Saudi Aramco, and Willis Towers Watson, and we presented it in Davos this year, and it lays out 6 imperatives for the future of human capital. And within that study, we talked about the shifting skills for HR as a profession. We also talked about some of these emerging roles, and two that I'm really intrigued by, because they I think underpin this idea of HR as a steward of work. The first is I've got 8 clients with the role of VP or SVP of HR for the future of work. And so these are individuals who operate, who report to the CHRO, who are tasked with helping organizations lead with the work, working alongside the technologists, working alongside the business people to help them continuously reinvent all of their work processes to ensure that we've got the optimal combinations of humans and machines. We've got the optimal combinations of employees versus gig talent, where we are using the outsourcer in a responsible way. And so that is an emerging role that I think is pretty exciting. The other is one that is equally exciting, and it's one where HR is dramatically ramping up its technology quotient. And it's a role within HR that is tasked with looking at all of these emerging technologies that are coming out maybe in other domains and figuring out how does HR start to apply some of these new technologies. So it's reinventing the work of HR itself. Yes. So those are two pretty interesting roles.
I wanted to also hear about the culture ambassador. You know, I'm an HR engagement person at heart, so we'll get a chance to work that in a little bit. Millennia Ramos has dropped the link, I think, in the comments to this very important paper. So I want to thank her for doing that. That was great. Kathy, since Ravin mentioned Saudi Aramco, I wanted to use that kind of as a segue back to you. Looks like last May, there was a joint session that was sponsored by them with 20 fellow oil and gas companies to kind of share lessons learned and best practices in managing the future of work as a co-chair of the World Economic Forum's Future of Work in Oil and Gas Task Force, and to create an industry-led roadmap. So I'd like to talk to you a little bit, seeing that you have been accepted the job. Congratulations, to lead a coalition in Milwaukee. Can you share with us how individual organizations can position themselves for the future of work? And then how can a region collaborate to prepare for the future work? And that appears to be the very work that you're doing right now.
Yeah, that's, I think that's exactly it. So, you know, all of the things that Ravin talked about are exactly on point. And what companies are seeing is, based on these technologies, they are seeing different types of competition from different types of industries than what may have previously been there before. So, recent study by Accenture showed that, 56% of executives believe that these rapid advancements in technologies are going to disrupt their industry. And 76% of them believe that the stakes have never been higher to make sure they're innovating on a regular basis. But the challenge that almost all are having is over 50% do not believe they have the required skills to successfully implement digital transformation, and that digital skills gap is actually widening. And so the challenge is, so as each individual organization can address this alone, what's happened in the Milwaukee region is they've come together and said, collectively, to be successful as a region, we need to transform our workforce. And, you see great reskilling programs in the marketplace. And, if you look at Amazon's a great one that you can look at, AT&T, IBM, et cetera. These are all companies with very large scale that can afford to do this on a one-off basis. But when you look at it as a region, and you look at, over 60% of employees are in small and medium businesses, there is a need to do this as a region. And so the choice was, you can either do this alone or together. And what Milwaukee has chosen to do is, industry leaders have come together to say, we're going to do this together. And our goal is to double the amount of tech talent here in the Milwaukee region over the next 5 years. And that goes to both meet the needs of individual employers and their needs around digital transformation, but also to drive the economic viability of the region, and doing it in a way that is inclusive of the populations in the region as well.
Thank you for that. And I wanted you to talk a little bit about technology absorption, because for the first time, we've got 5 generations in the workforce. So talking about the future of work and technology absorption, share with us maybe some insights there, either and or both of you.
Yeah, first of all, it starts with technology. It starts with leadership, right? So as leaders, they need to understand the art of the possible, and be able to chart the strategies of the future that are inclusive of digital capabilities. And that need to be able to understand data, how it can be utilized in an organization to transform, is a really important skills for our leaders, to plot the future of their organizations. And one that often, as much as we want to think works really seamlessly, I don't know if anybody's ever had the experience of taking data to a leader and saying, I don't believe that. That's not true. Look at it again. That's a very common response. And
Sure.
and so it starts with that leadership, but it goes all the way down to digital literacy of all. And actually, we've just started a reskilling program in Milwaukee that'll be about 10,000 per month. And it's a digital literacy for all, so that everybody coming into the workforce has a base level of digital literacy. So, and then there's everything in between, right? On the digital skills, whether that's data scientist or cloud specialist, et cetera. But those are all critical skill sets for us to be able to take advantage of this future of work.
Yes, thank you for that. I'm very curious to learn more about that digital literacy for all. I think there are many regions in the Midwest and around the world who could certainly take advantage of those types of opportunities. Mm-hmm. And I did want to double back and say, for your task force, your tech hub organization, there are 6 companies, right, that have made a 2-year commitment to double a 2-year, $5 million commitment. Is that correct? So I think that's pretty significant. What are the names of those organizations?
Yeah, it actually started initially with, it was announced as a nonprofit back in October, funded by 6 large organizations. So Northwestern Mutual, Aurora, Kohl's, Johnson Controls, Accenture, and Rockwell Automation. Since then, we've had another 6 join us in January, and we'll have at least that many onboarded again in the April timeframe. So we are accelerating this with the regional employers as they come together to address this requirement.
Wonderful. And Ravin, earlier, Kathy was talking about the gig economy, online labor platforms, and new employment types. Do you, both of you, can you speak to where these are really growing and maybe where there's any lagging, and what this means for the reinvention of jobs and work at the speed of light?
Yeah, I would say that the platforms have really been growing, and I'll give you some examples. But I think the AB 5 in California, Assembly Bill 5, has perhaps raised a lot of questions, and perhaps put the crimp, I suppose, on the rapid progression of the gig economy, specifically as it relates to I think Uber and Lyft and Deliveroo and those on the consumer facing side of things. But it's particularly compelling, I think, on the professional side of things, because you see organizations engage with gig talent for one of 2 reasons. One is where there is a sense that the cost of work being done by someone on a platform is going to be materially lower than the cost of work being done by an employee in a full-time job. So either I don't need someone in a full-time job where I can projectize the work, or the labor market has shifted such that the cost of the skills in my enterprise are uncompetitive with the cost of the skills in the open market. And so that's one example where it's a cost angle. Other angle is where you're seeing it for capacity and skills. And so for the first time, we're seeing talent leave the likes of Google and Apple and other top tech companies to move on to platforms like TopTal and 10X. And the reason that they do that is obviously the opportunity to earn lots more income, which is interesting in and of itself, but also the opportunity to take on many different types of projects. a couple of years ago, we interviewed a gentleman who was on one of these platforms, and the question was why. Why have you moved from a really secure, stable job where you were a 5-rated person at this large tech company in Mountain View to actually working on one of these platforms? And so the point was, well, it's income. I'm making 30 to 40% more work for significantly less hours worked. I have a lot more work-life flexibility. I get to work from wherever I want. And this was the kicker for me, because I'm interviewing him from Chicago, and it was January and -20 and snowing. And he's on his boat in Monte Carlo Harbor, which is apparently where he works from. So, which is great.
Wow.
I would take that gig.
Yeah.
But the thing that was most critical to him was the fact that in the previous month to me interviewing him, he had worked with DARPA and NASA on projects that he would never have had an opportunity to work on if he was captive and bound to his previous employer. And that's something that we see. And Kathy, I'd love to get your reaction to this. Talent that is at the bleeding edge in the digital space, it seems like understands more acutely than any of us that their ability to stay relevant hinges on continuous learning and applying and adopting new skills.
Yeah.
Because they see a very clear commercial path to commercializing those skills. And so they see that direct link between skills.
And I would completely agree. And, it's an interesting portion of the economy right now, both because it allows us to take advantage of skills as needed and on demand when they're needed. But it also, and that's from an employer perspective, but from an employee perspective, there are still, I'll call it, unmet needs and things that need to be worked on in order to support this ecosystem going forward. So if you think about their needs, having access to benefits and having access to community and upskilling opportunities, and being able to take advantage or take care of the business side of it, while they also form and unformed teams, et cetera. Some of those things are actually things that are not completely met in the market today. And as we start to meet those requirements, I think we'll see even more growth and even more advantage to the employers from that segment.
Okay. And Kathy, I know you wanted to talk about a focus from a freelancer perspective and how we need to build systems of support. So talk a little bit about that. Does that factor into this at all? It
does, and it's actually one of the initiatives that we're focused on here in the Milwaukee region, is to build those systems of support that enable this portion of the economy to grow even more. And, both for the benefit of the employers as for the employees, there really is a win-win here for all.
Wonderful. And so then how would either of you, Ravin, it sounds like, I felt like you were saying something from Chicago. You looked like you had a thought there.
Nope.
Okay.
No, go.
How would either of you advise CEOs and C-suite leaders that are driven by core values to reach the conclusion of no worker left behind due to technology and automation?
So I think I would say there are some great examples of organizations that have done this. And, probably at the heart of this idea of no worker left behind is the recognition that every employee needs to perpetually reinvent themselves to stay relevant. And I think Satya Nadella said it best at Microsoft, about changing their culture from a culture of know-it-alls to a culture of learn-it-alls. And that to me is incredibly profound, because when you unpeel that and unpack it, what you see is, a culture of learn-it-alls is one of incredible humility. It's a culture of sharing. It's a culture of curiosity. It's a culture of always looking for connections, looking around the next corner. It's a culture that recognizes that I don't have all the answers, but someone else does. And it's in my benefit for me to collaborate. It's a culture of continuous experimentation and failure. The heart of the agile movement is this notion of failing fast. And many organizations say it, but many of our control mechanisms, how we pay people, how we manage performance, how we promote, how we structure work are predicated on fail-proof mechanisms, right? Hitting the number 100% of the time, as opposed to saying, you know what, Marcus, great try. I'm going to give you a 5 for effort. No, it's probably going to be, Marcus, great try. Better luck next time. I'm going to give you the 3,
right,
because you only met your goals partially, potentially.
right.
So I think at the heart of this is a need for us to sort of ask the question of not just how do we ensure that we give people the opportunities to reinvent themselves and upskill and reskill, but what are all of the enabling mechanisms within the organization, explicit or implicit, that are actually getting in the way?
And I would add to that the culture. For years, I think we, especially in the United States, have had a culture of these skills are no longer relevant. Therefore, we're going to get rid of those employees, and we're going to bring on new employees with a new set of skills. And I think what companies are now finding is that is not as easy to do as what it has been in the past, right? It is a very tight labor market, and the skills that they're looking for are often can be referred to as unicorn skills, right? It's a unique set and blend that very few people have and are very difficult to recruit. And so for that reason, I think there's a couple of things we need to start that we're advising leaders to start thinking differently about. Part of that is, how do you break down that unicorn skill set and job description to be collectively developed by a team of people? Teams of people that form and unform, as opposed to an ongoing structured set of roles that never change, right? It adds to that learning capability that Ravin was talking about, but also allows you to bring together the skill sets to solve the problem at the time without having to look for that unicorn skill set. And so I think that's a really important thing that leaders are now starting to understand, is that there's other ways of sourcing the talent in a collaborative way.
Yeah. And to me, that's perfectly aligned and connected to building systems of support. I think we think of them just externally, but I think as you seek to capitalize and leverage the sense of belonging and being able to drive engagement and people being interconnected to organizations, I think the more that you think about build and bridge strategies instead of just buy strategies or replace strategies, that you really reinforce to employees their sense of belonging, empowers the ideating, powers the innovating, powers the collaboration that you really want to see in the organization. I want to go to the comments as we are having fun and time is fleeting past us. Louise Smith says we should elaborate more on what Ravin just said about mechanisms in the org that get in the way. I'd love to hear you guys expand on that. Seems not to have gotten enough discussion. Ravin and or Kathy.
Sure. So let me give you another example. Kathy's actually building on the point Kathy just made, which is, this idea that it's, the build versus, the buy versus build. One of the things that gets in the way are the perverse incentives we have in terms of how we account for business performance, right? So to Kathy's point, what drives this mindset of I can do a RIF, I can do a reduction in force, and then go out and hire people, is because the cost of that restructuring is something that falls below the line. So in corporate America today, under GAAP accounting, I have an incentive not to train, because if I train, that's an above the line expense and that's going to hit my earnings, versus if I do a RIF and get rid of all of these people, that number falls below my earnings per share line. And then I can go out and get, theoretically, the people who already have the skills.
Right.
As opposed to taking on the cost of training someone, potentially that taking a lot of time, and with no guarantee that the people I've trained will be fully productive. And so I think we need to pivot towards a set of mechanisms that encourage leaders to do that. And I think what's driving the right behavior is what Kathy said. We've got an extremely tight labor market. It's why you see Amazon putting $700 million into reskilling, why PwC is putting in $3 billion. You've got Starbucks with its relationship with Arizona State University and the opportunity for all of their talent to earn a degree. And I think what you're seeing is, at least in the market today, the recognition that we need something else besides just, sort of fire and hire. But the worry is going to be if we do see a spike in unemployment rates, if the labor market becomes a little looser, do we go back to some of those legacy practices?
Yeah, and I want to mention another structural one. Often, and this is specifically for tech degrees, but I think it applies in a lot of different places. For a lot of tech roles, we require a 4-year degree to even get in the door. And then we put them into roles like a cloud administrator that takes a certification that you can get in a year. And that mismatch between our requirements and the way we've set up requirements for jobs versus the way that the skills that are actually needed within a role are very different. So we need to start looking at those structural, job requirements to say, can we take on somebody that has gone through a certification project or has gone through a 2-year program, so that we can more quickly get the skills that we need in the workforce. So that's one that I would say is really important. And the other one, I just want to build on what Ravin said about, buy versus build. We did a project just before the second half of last year where we used AI to help us in starting to look at how do we do that talent strategy. Which things should we buy? Which ones should we build? Which ones should we borrow? And it started to look at those things, those tasks that are going to be automated going forward into the future, either through augmentation, through intelligent augmentation, or through automation. And then what are those upskill pathways that exist? Where are the skills adjacencies within a role that provide those upskill pathways? And I think that's one of those things that can be used to start to build into an analysis to say, even if I don't have the skills right now, I can start to build a skills pathway based on adjacent skills to get to the level that I need to get to.
Fantastic. And we're just almost at 15 minutes. I tell you, time is flying. We're having fun. I want to talk a little bit about your 4-step approach to reinventing jobs. And just as part of that, because I know that your 4.0 talks about 4 things that are important to employees. And being an employee advocate at heart, connections with colleagues and trust in leadership, individual growth and reward opportunities, meaningful work that aligns with employees' values and contributes to a higher purpose, and work that opportunities that occur in an environment that support productivity and performance. So I'm wondering, as you walk us through this reinventing of jobs and deconstruction, whether or not you would recommend that employers, organizations involve affected employees in the development of those new jobs.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's, change in virtually all instances is most sustainable when every stakeholder is involved, and who more critical to that change than the employee themselves. And so I've got a number of clients who actively engage their talent in getting them to think about the reinvention of their own jobs and give them the incentives to do so. They give them the space so they can actually be thoughtful about where should we be applying robotic process automation to substitute some of the highly repetitive tasks. Where can I be actually freeing myself up to do the things that might be of higher value? Or if there is so much automation that's coming into this role, could I, instead of reskill to stay in the same role, perhaps upskill for a different role? So giving people the motivation, the space, and the opportunity to kind of be the adults in the conversation, I think, is essential. But I want to just quickly walk through the framework. The context for this, this was in my last book called Reinventing Jobs, which was published by the Harvard Business Review. And the context for the framework and the reason we wrote the book was we were getting really concerned that so much of the narrative in organizations was this tail of technology wagging the dog of the business, as opposed to the work of the organization leading to its reinvention. And so the framework we put in place with two macro steps with a couple of sub steps. The first step is to deconstruct the work. And there's two parts to that. Taking a job or a workflow and asking the question of, for all the tasks that make it up, what is repetitive versus variable? What's performed independently versus interactively with customers or colleagues? What's physical versus mental in nature? Once you've categorized the tasks, then asking the question of, what are we trying to solve for? In most organizations, think of our typical HR processes, right? There is an inherent belief that that more performance is always better. Think of your typical incentive plans, your performance management systems. They're all predicated on the idea that there is a steady upward sloping curve when I draw the relationship between value to the company and the performance of the task. Mm-hmm. And what my co-author, John Boudreau, and I have found over the last, many, many years, mm-hmm. Is that there are four relationships. There are certain tasks where all we want to do is minimize errors. Think of the work of an airline pilot or a driller on an oil rig. I don't need a lot of creativity or innovation when it comes to landing a plane. We've been doing that just fine since the Wright brothers in the late 20s, or actually before that. And there is a standard accepted methodology for doing that. We don't need creativity there. What we need is 100% of airline pilots to operate at that minimum standard and not make any mistakes. Mm-hmm. There are other types of work where we're looking to minimize variance. Think of transaction processing work, etc. And yet others where there is that steady upward sloping relationship. Think of a salesperson. More sales, typically a good thing for the company, certain conditions met. Mm-hmm. And then there is a fourth relationship where there is an exponential relationship, where small increase in performance can yield disproportionately greater value. We see that in the work of data scientists. We see that in the work of scientists working in biotechs. We see that in R&D in researchers, where there is a premium to having someone with skills that are slightly different, slightly better, and that premium is exponential. So once you've understood the work, then understanding the relevant type of automation. Is it robotic process automation? Is it AI, whether it's natural language processing, or with robotics, what we would call social robotics, where it's robots working alongside or interacting with humans and other machines. And once you've gone through those three steps, what you get are some very specific outcomes. You identify where human tasks should be substituted by one of those automations because we're trying to minimize errors or minimize variance. Where should it be augmented? Because we can take the truly human attributes of creativity and innovation and make that person significantly more productive through the use of smart assistants, just to pick on one, through machine learning. And then yet other examples of where new human work is created as a result of the presence of automation. And the thing that we found, this book has about 150 examples in it of all of these combinations at play across a variety of industries, across a variety of types of work. So a quick flyby of the framework, Marcus.
Okay. And so people can get your framework in the Reinventing Jobs, and we're going to, as a little shameless plug at the end, give them an opportunity to do that. Kathy, I want to come back to you and talk, and Ravin, whether or not there are top skills that are in demand, that are universally transferable skills that you're seeing in any given industry, a particular industry. We focus a lot on technical skills, but there might be transferable skills that workers that are all throughout stages of work, freelance or traditional employers that might have, that help us to better work through reconstructing jobs.
And so first of all, we did talk about digital literacy, and I just put in the chat a correction because I think I misstated at one point, so apologies to all. But the other one, I always look at this as everyone needs to have digital literacy. Everyone needs to have basic data understanding. But then probably the most important things are these human skills, things that are not easily replicatable. As I'm talking to employers every day, the critical thinking skills is one that's on the top of everyone's list. And I think, as we look at how our educational system has evolved, we're very much into test taking, get the right answer kind of thing. And what we're starting to develop is programs that are much more problem-based without any right answer, right? So I now create challenges for a student that says, and I had we had one class that said, how do you best match volunteers with volunteer labor? And by the end of a semester, they had created an AI chat box that allowed them to do that after doing lots of investigation, talking to volunteers, talking to volunteer management organizations, etc. And I think that's a critical skill to say there's no right answer. That answer could have gone 1,000 different ways. They happened to do it with a technology-based solution in a high school class. But that critical thinking skill of being able to define the problem, build on that, what possible solutions, talk to people to test those solutions and come out with an answer, I think is a really critical skill that we've got to continue to develop, and especially students coming out of college as we look at different kinds of project-based approaches.
Okay, so critical thinking, I know communication, empathy, problem solving, collaboration, and all of these appear to be things that enable this lifelong learning. I think that you talked about, Ravin, in the 4.0, and intellectual curiosity, all of the kind of skills that are transferable in a lot of different industries, right?
Exactly.
Okay, I want to go pivot really quickly to Unilever. I was really fascinated in the 4.0 that part of their strategy has resulted in over 1 million interactions and searches, which has freed up 300,000 hours annually for employees, both in their base and in HR, to have more interactions, more front time based on the automation that they've added. Can you tell us a little bit more about that case study as we're moving close to 5 minutes? This time is flying.
Yeah, so I'll just share a little bit to pique people's interest, but the report, thanks to the folks on the on this chat who have shared the report. Unilever, in my humble opinion, is probably one of the most progressive organizations as it relates to the future of work, and some that they in the last 10 years now have a perfectly balanced mix of 50-50 as it relates to gender, which is no mean feat. But they are incredibly progressive. And what anchors everything they do around the future of work is this strong sense of purpose. And so the example, Marcus, that you've picked on here is how they have used AI in their recruiting processes. And while many have gotten stuck with how do we not perpetuate the biases, how do we how do we use AI in a way that's how do we not use AI to perpetuate the biases? What Unilever has actually done is said, how do we use AI to stop these biases? And actually having their screening algorithms not look at gender, not look at where someone is coming from, not look at their school, etc. Because what that does is that it screens out a lot of the legacy factors that drive then bias on the part of human recruiters. And so it's fascinating as to how they've actually used AI as a tool to not just increase the volume of talent that they look at, but to ensure a much more unbiased assessment of skills and opportunity as talent moves through the pipeline. So I think that's a great example. The other thing that they've done incredibly well, as I talked about them starting with purpose, is they're incredibly articulate about how work is going to be perpetually reinvented, and being transparent with people that, you know what, you will always need to reskill, upskill to stay relevant. And there are 3 pathways. You know, you might reskill within the same job. You might upskill to a different job in a different role, or you might actually transition and move beyond the organization. And we're going to make it easy for you to go through each of those in a way that is sort of sustainable and is humane and is in keeping with our values.
Kathy, did you want to add anything to that out of the work that you are doing, the very great work? And I hope that in this coalition that you're formulating some type of prototype or template that you can share with us, because I know there are many regions that could benefit from the work that you're doing.
You know, and I think the other things that we're seeing is just as these jobs change, we need to change the way we're describing the jobs as well to make them more inclusive as well. It's really an interesting kind of view, but as you look at, as we recruit for jobs, being able to recruit based on a problem is actually much more effective. So reshaping jobs so they start to describe what problem they're trying to solve and what contribution they actually have and the outcome that they have into the environment. As we look at the next generation, most of them are just as motivated by impact. I know there's a lot of studies out there that say people will choose a job that has impact over money. And so it's really important that we start to think about how do we reshape job descriptions in order to attract talent, and also how do we help enable and create the linkage in the organization so people know the outcomes that they are driving to as an organization. That helps us attract talent, but it also helps us attract diverse talent because, you know, it's interesting, you know, just women in general tend to have this even more so. And you look at girls and why they drop out of tech. A lot of them will say, I don't want to be sitting at a computer, you know, typing. I want to make a difference in the world. And then you start to describe the ability to make a difference on scale when you're working in the tech field, and all of a sudden they become more interested. And so how changing and shaping the way we shape jobs, I think is going to be really important as we go forward in the future.
Thank you for that. We're at our 2-minute mark. And so I would say if the statistic is correct that in just about 2 years, 50% of organizations estimate that there will be some reduction to their full-time workforce, what's the elevator pitch of advice that you might give to the CEOs of organizations who may not have started to look at reinventing jobs and work?
Yeah, Marcus, I would actually push back on the fact that there will be a net reduction in jobs in 2 years. I think we will see a period of significant transition. There will certainly be some movement of talent from one industry to another. But I really do believe that if you start with the work, and the HR 4.0 report has some examples, as I mentioned, Reinventing Jobs is 150 examples. If you start with the work and responsibly and thoughtfully think about how automation can play a role, you don't end up with purely substitution. What you get is some substitution, lots of augmentation, and certainly some creation of new jobs and demand for new types of skills. So my 2-second advice would be lead with the work.
Yeah, and I would completely agree. As you know, if you start with the work, you can start to reorganize the work in a way that makes the jobs attractive and the company attractive externally. Because as we reinvent work, it will make, you know, and you augment it and you get out of the routine, etc., you'll become a talent attractor in the region. So I would also recommend that.
Wonderful. Ravin, thank you so much. Kathy, thank you so much. We're winding down to our last 20 seconds. If you want a copy of Ravin's book, if you go to LinkedIn and tag Ravin, me, and Kathy, I will send you a copy of his book. Reinventing Jobs. You gotta go to LinkedIn, you got to tag Ravin, Kathy, and myself. In order to, the first one that does that, you'll be able to do it. Thank you all for sharing the wealth of your time. I really appreciate it. I think we'll be better for our journey because of your expertise in this area. And I wish you well. Have a great day. Thanks everybody for tuning in.
Thank you all.